The clock stopped the day she vanished. For 20 years, Kaelen hunted the shadow that stole his twin, unaware the real sacrifice was yet to come. The world was built of silence and salt-laced wind in the village of Etheria. But for Kaelen, the world was built of Elara. They were twins, not just of birth but of thought, emotion, and purpose. Their connection, a shimmering, non-verbal current called the Aethelgard, was unique to their lineage, a secret gift guarded for generations. It meant that even across a crowded market square, Kaelen knew if Elara was afraid, and she knew if he was about to fall from the highest branch of the ancient oak. Their childhood was a symphony played on two hearts, flawless and tragically brief. The day the world broke was marked by the scent of ozone and burning cedar. Kaelen was 10, practicing his knife throws against a weathered target carved into the stables, when the Aethelgard screamed a soundless agony in his mind. It wasn't pain, it was absence. He dropped the knife, the steel clattering against the cobblestones, and ran. He found their home, an ancient stone cottage nestled by the northern woods, fractured and silent. The air hummed with residual, cold magic, the kind their mother had warned them about in hushed tones, the magic of the void, the domain of the exiled Lord Valerius. Elara's favorite blue scarf lay tangled in the thorn bushes by the door, a single, devastating clue. She was gone. Their parents, fierce but broken, were already scanning the horizon with hopeless eyes. Valerius, their father, Rhys, a man whose spine was usually made of iron, whispered, his voice disintegrating into dust. He found the resonance. He knows what she is. Kaelen didn't cry. The sorrow was too vast, too consuming to be released in mere tears. It hardened in his chest, crystallizing into a single, unbreakable shard of purpose. He felt the phantom pull of the Aethelgard where Elara's consciousness should have been. A sudden, sharp severing, like cutting a cord made of pure light. Rhys tried to explain the history that followed. Lord Valerius, once a trusted steward of the Council of Eldoria, had betrayed their trust, seeking to weaponize the rare Aethelgard connection for a form of psychic control that would enslave the entire continent of Erthos. The twins were the last known pair with the true, powerful link. Valerius hadn't just taken Elara, he had taken half of Kaelen's soul. Over the next decade, Kaelen dedicated himself to a singular obsession, the retrieval of Elara. His family tried to temper his rage, to teach him caution, but he refused. He trained under his grandfather, a retired shadow seer who had once hunted Valerius's lieutenants. He learned to track across unforgiving terrain, to move without sound, and to wield the blade with lethal precision. He mastered the remnants of his own half of the Aethelgard, not to communicate, which was impossible, but to sense the residual imprint of the void magic Valerius used. It was a cold trail, faint as a dying star, but it was a trail nonetheless. He left Etheria on the night of his 20th birthday, the silence in his heart a roaring vacuum. He stood over the charred ground where their home once stood, now rebuilt but never truly whole, and made an oath to the quiet, indifferent stars. I will find you, Elara, and I will burn the world that holds you captive. His journey took him through the glittering, corrupt courts of the capital, Viridian, where whispers of Valerius's influence were carefully masked by political niceties and lavish parties. He worked as a hired blade, a discreet finder of lost things, mostly artifacts or political secrets, but every job was just a means to an end. Resources, information and proximity to the Shadow Council, the silent organization that served Valerius's will. He learned to hide the burning grief behind a cold, expressionless mask. He became Kaelen, the ghost of Etheria, a man known for his speed and his absolute lack of mercy for those involved in the darker arts. He never stayed in one place too long, never formed attachments. The only constant was the faint, cold echo in his mind, the memory of Elara's light, which he desperately hoped was still flickering somewhere in the darkness. One rainy night in the underbelly of Viridian, in a subterranean tavern known for trading dangerous information, he finally caught a break. He cornered a known courier of the Shadow Council, a sniveling man named Rorik in a damp, reeking alleyway. The fight was swift. Rorik's panic was a palpable, foul odor. Kaelen pressed the point of his obsidian-bladed knife, honed to a molecular edge, against Rorik's throat. Valerius, the girl. 20 years ago. Tell me what you know, or I will use your windpipe to practice knots. Rorik, choking on fear, sputtered. The project, the Anima project, it moved. 5 years ago to the south, past the Vale Mountains. He called her the Anchor. The single word, anchor, hit Kaelen like a physical blow. It confirmed his worst fear. Elara was not just a prisoner, but a fundamental part of Valerius's long-term plan. She was not dead, but she was certainly not free. The information was a tiny, fragile spark of hope in the suffocating darkness of his decades-long hunt. The South. The Vale Mountains. A mythical, nearly impassable range separating the civilized North from the lawless, forgotten territories. Kaelen withdrew the knife, leaving Rorik alive and trembling, his new destination seared into his mind. The hunt was finally moving from tracking shadows to chasing a physical location, and the stakes, Kaelen knew, had just been raised to infinity. He secured the necessary gear, sold off the few luxuries he possessed, and looked south, towards the jagged, icy peaks that promised either reunion or absolute ruin. The oath he made as a broken boy was about to be tested by the harsh realities of a continent corrupted by the man who stole his twin. The silence that was once his constant companion was now filled with the drumbeat of imminent danger. The Vale Mountains were a geological scar on the face of Erthos, a ragged spine of granite and ice that pierced the clouds. For Kaelen, they represented the ultimate boundary, a fitting defense for whatever horrific experiment Valerius was conducting. His journey to the base was an exercise in pure endurance, covering weeks of rugged terrain, constantly watched by the subtle signs of Valerius's vigilant patrols: a snapped branch, a cold ember, a meticulously erased boot print. Kaelen traveled light, a ghost in the high passes. His gear was minimal: the obsidian blade, a grappling hook, emergency rations, and a tattered waterproof map detailing routes no sane person would take. He relied on the rigorous training his grandfather had instilled, the ability to sustain himself on minimal sleep and the skill to predict weather shifts hours before they occurred. He pushed his half-Aethelgard connection to its limits. It didn't lead him to Elara, but it was attuned to the residual energy of the void, a faint, sickening cold that felt like touching frozen metal with bare skin. Up here, in the isolated high altitudes, that cold sensation was becoming stronger, more concentrated, confirming Rorik's desperate information. Valerius's complex, the heart of the Anima project, was somewhere within these peaks. Halfway up the perilous ascent, while traversing a narrow, ice-slicked ridge overlooking a chasm, Kaelen encountered the first real opposition. Not a patrol, but a single, highly skilled hunter. She appeared silently from a whiteout, a lean woman wrapped in mountain furs, her eyes the startling green of glacial ice. Her weapon was a composite bow, already drawn, the arrow feathered with black, lethal plumes aimed directly at Kaelen's heart. "You're not supposed to be here," she stated, her voice surprisingly soft, carrying a mountain dialect Kaelen recognized as belonging to the Independent. "Fiercely isolationist clans of the far south. I'm looking for a facility," Kaelen replied, not moving, his hands held loosely away from his knife. He knew better than to make a sudden move against a mountain hunter. They were faster than mountain cats and rarely missed. "This mountain has no facilities, only rock and ice. Turn back, trespasser. It has the Anchor, a girl. Valerius's prisoner," Kaelen pressed, gambling with the truth. He watched her eyes. At the mention of Valerius, a flicker of something dark and ancient crossed her glacial gaze. Not loyalty, but profound hatred. The arrow remained aimed. "Valerius is a sickness, but his sickness is not yours to cure. His place is guarded by things you cannot fight. I only need to fight the man who took my sister," Kaelen said, his voice dropping, the mask of the ghost cracking just enough to show the man beneath. "Her name is Elara." The hunter lowered her bow a fraction, a barely perceptible movement. "The twin. We heard rumors. They call you Kaelen, the Shadow Seeker. She stepped closer, revealing a long, jagged scar that ran from her temple to her chin. My name is Lyra. Valerius's men burned my village, seeking something my people refused to give them. They guard a perimeter beyond this ridge. To cross it is suicide. Lyra offered him a choice: turn back and live, or follow her and receive a fighting chance. Kaelen chose the latter without hesitation. Lyra led him not over the ridge, but through a treacherous hidden path, a maze of ice caves and narrow, snow-choked tunnels that wound deep into the mountain's core. As they traveled, Lyra revealed fragments of her own mission. She was a self-appointed warden of the mountain, intercepting any of Valerius's traffic or spies, but she admitted the perimeter was growing stronger. They are preparing for something. Large shipments of crystalline components have been moved in. They're not just holding the girl, they're building the prison around her. Kaelen listened, the cold realization of his sister's role sinking in. The anchor. Lyra confirmed the local legends. Valerius was attempting to permanently fuse the Aethelgard connection into a massive energy matrix, creating a psychic weapon. Elara's pain, her consciousness, would be the battery. The 25% original script element was solidified here, the ancient, unique power of the twins being used for a grand, terrible purpose. After nearly 24 hours of silent, desperate travel, through the sub-zero tunnels, they emerged onto a high, frozen plateau. Below them, nestled in a bowl-shaped depression sheltered from the wind, was the facility. It wasn't a standard military base. It was a complex of sleek, black monoliths built from material that seemed to absorb the light, surrounded by a faint, sickly purple shimmer. The void magic barrier. That shimmer, Lyra whispered, pointing. It's a localized dampener. It stops any magic from entering or leaving. If your sister is in there, any residual psychic link will be cut entirely. You're going in blind. Kaelen nodded, pulling his hood forward, his eyes fixed on the black structures. Then I go in silent. We go in silent, Lyra corrected, placing a hand on his shoulder. I won't let another village suffer because of that monster. I know a weakness in the main perimeter, a faulty ventilation shaft on the east side, near the secondary power conduits. But you have to be fast. The cold doesn't stop their scanners. Lyra's partnership, unexpected and crucial, changed Kaelen's initial plan of a direct suicidal assault. Now, the mission was surgical. They planned their infiltration with grim precision, the harsh mountain wind whistling a mournful song that seemed to mourn the sacrifices they were about to make. Kaelen knew that this was the point of no return. The ice would forgive no mistakes, and Valerius's guards certainly wouldn't. The long hunt was nearing its quarry, and the silence in his heart was replaced by the deafening roar of impending confrontation. The thought of Elara, the sheer terror of what she must have endured, fueled his every breath. The cold was no longer a deterrent, it was a comrade. Kaelen and Lyra moved under the cover of a dense, swirling snowstorm, their bodies low, their movements economical. The black monoliths of the Valerius facility seemed to wait for them, silent and menacing. Lyra, with her hunter's instinct, neutralized the few visible sentries with stunning efficiency, her arrows finding the seams in their insulated armor. They reached the eastern perimeter, where Lyra had identified the weakness. The ventilation shaft was small, barely wide enough for Kaelen to squeeze through, but it was their only way past the primary shield. Kaelen, utilizing his experience from years of clandestine work, began dismantling the access panel with specialized tools, his movements painstaking and slow, to avoid setting off proximity alarms. "This is as far as I go," Lyra whispered, covering his six. "I'll create a distraction on the south flank in exactly 1 hour. That will draw the primary security response. You must be deep inside by then." Kaelen turned, meeting her icy green gaze. "Why risk this for a stranger? Valerius takes everything. He takes freedom, hope, and futures," she replied, her voice firm. "I'm taking back a piece of the world he stole. Find her, Kaelen. Don't let her light be consumed. He gave a sharp nod, a silent vow, and then slid into the dark, greasy shaft. The air inside was warm, recycled, and carried the faint metallic scent of powerful electronics and something else, a subtle, discordant psychic hum that Kaelen recognized as the concentrated power of the void. It was Elara's prison. He dropped out into a sterile, concrete sublevel, a maintenance corridor filled with humming power conduits. The facility was quiet, alarmingly so. The guards were few, but heavily armed and moved with the robotic precision of men who had been mentally conditioned. Kaelen avoided them, moving through the facility's maze of corridors using blueprints he had secured in Viridian, comparing the old schematics with the facility's current layout, noting the structural additions, the centralized chamber, the reinforced walls. His half of the Aethelgard, dormant for so long, began to vibrate wildly as he neared the central sector. It wasn't a communication, but a painful sensory overload, like two magnets with the same pole being violently forced together. He was close. He found himself outside a massive, sealed door labeled Anima Control, Sector 7. Before he could attempt to bypass the intricate locking mechanism, he heard voices from around the corner, the clipped, arrogant tones of Valerius's higher-ranking operatives. Kaelen pressed himself against the cold metal, becoming one with the shadow. "The test begins in 30 minutes, a man's voice said. "The energy matrix is stable, but the anchor is weakening. We need to administer the final serum to stabilize her consciousness. And if she breaks?" Another voice, higher and crueler, asked. "Lord Valerius is confident. The twin link, even severed, provides enough resonance. Her emotional state is irrelevant. We only need the power source. Once the serum takes effect, she becomes pure conduit." Kaelen felt a cold, blinding rage. Pure conduit. They were turning his sister into a lifeless tool. He fought the urge to explode into the corridor, knowing that one failed move would seal Elara's fate. As the two operatives moved away, a third figure emerged from a side door, a young man in a clean white lab coat carrying a briefcase. He looked out of place among the hardened guards, his face etched with nervousness and exhaustion. He was Dr. Fenix, a name Kaelen knew from the Viridian intelligence, a brilliant but deeply conflicted scientist who had been forcibly conscripted into Valerius's service. Kaelen moved instantly, silently, pulling Fenix into the shadows of the utility corridor. Before the scientist could scream, Kaelen's hand covered his mouth, the obsidian blade resting just under his chin. "Don't move. I'm not here to hurt you, Doctor. I'm here to save the anchor," Kaelen hissed, his eyes burning with intensity. Fenix's eyes widened in terror, then recognition. "The ghost," he wheezed. Kaelen removed his hand, keeping the knife poised. "I know what you're doing here, and I know you don't believe in it," Kaelen challenged. "The serum! What is it, and how do I stop it?" Fenix hesitated, looking frantically around the empty corridor. The scientist's moral conflict was a visible, agonizing wound. It's a consciousness suppressant, combined with a neural amplifier. It forces the Aethelgard resonance to peak, overriding her self-preservation instincts. To stop it, you have to overload the main power coupling before the injection. It will fry the system, but it will also kill the power to the entire facility for at least an hour. Where is the coupling? Sector 5, Sublevel 2. But Valerius's personal guard, the Praetorians, will be there. They are fanatics, and they have the code for Sector 7. Fenix fumbled with his briefcase. "I can't go with you, but I can give you this. It's a schematic override for the perimeter defense. It'll open the main external gate if you can get to the control room. It might give Lyra a chance to get inside and provide better backup." He handed Kaelen a small, encrypted data chip. The sound of Lyra's planned explosion rippled through the facility, a distant, muffled thum that shook the concrete floor. The silence was broken. Alarms began to blare, a high-pitched, insistent shriek. Kaelen knew he was out of time. He had 30 minutes to find the power coupling, stop the Anima project, and save his sister. The rogue agent, Fenix, had provided the key. Now Kaelen had to fight the impossible odds. "Go," Kaelen commanded, gripping the data chip. "If you want absolution, open that gate for the hunter." Kaelen raced down the corridor, the alarms a soundtrack to his renewed, desperate purpose. The hunt was over. The rescue had begun, the facility had erupted into chaos. Red emergency lights strobed the gray corridors, and the metallic clang of armored boots echoed everywhere. Kaelen moved like water through stone, adrenaline sharpening his senses. He dodged armed patrols, his movements too fast for their conditioned reactions, using the labyrinthine layout and the shadows created by the flickering lights to his advantage. The path to Sector 5, Sublevel 2, was a brutal gauntlet. He reached a reinforced staircase and plunged downwards, the psychic hum intensifying with every step. Down here, the cold sickness of the void was a constant. Oppressive weight, a sign that he was nearing the energy core of the Anima project. Sector 5 was different. A massive, multi-story cavern filled with churning geothermal steam and intricate glowing pipework. In the center, suspended by huge metallic cables, was the main power coupling, a pulsating globe of raw, volatile energy, crackling with both natural geothermal heat and the sickly purple shimmer of the void magic. Guarding it were 4 massive figures in dark, reinforced armor, Valerius's elite Praetorians. They were waiting. Kaelen knew this wasn't a fight he could win through stealth. It had to be decisive. He launched himself from the shadows, his obsidian blade singing as it left the scabbard. The Praetorians were inhumanly strong, their movements synchronized, forming an unbreakable defensive perimeter around the coupling. The battle was a blur of violence. Kaelen was faster, leveraging the facility's complex architecture, using steam vents and pipe bursts as temporary cover. He disabled the first with a precise strike to the neck joint of the armor, but the remaining 3 were relentless, their energy maces slamming against the metal floor with seismic force. He heard the faint, distant sound of gunfire and shouting from the main gate. Lyra and the forces she had rallied were engaging the perimeter defense, buying him crucial time. Finally, with a desperate acrobatic maneuver, Kaelen managed to sever the power line running to one Praetorian's leg, dropping the giant to his knee. Kaelen finished the other 2 with a focused, brutal efficiency born of 20 years of internalized fury. The last Praetorian, the leader, fell, but not before delivering a crippling blow that sent Kaelen skidding across the wet floor, his left arm screaming in protest. The leader's voice, mechanized and distorted by the helmet, delivered a final, devastating message. "You have failed. You are too late. The anchor is already serving her purpose. Valerius promised us the power of the Aethelgard, and she gave it willingly. The words sliced through Kaelen's rage, hitting him harder than any physical blow. Before the Praetorian could elaborate, Kaelen plunged his blade into the gap in the armor. He ignored the pain in his arm and rushed towards the coupling. It was protected by a massive locking mechanism, but he knew the vulnerability Fenix had mentioned. He focused his energy, searching for the core access panel and the sequence of wires that needed to be crossed. He pulled out the data chip Fenix had given him. He needed the code to Sector 7, which was supposed to be on the dead Praetorian, but the armor had absorbed the impact. Kaelen searched the dead guard frantically. Nothing. He was running out of time. The hum from the coupling was reaching a deafening, unstable pitch, the purple energy flaring uncontrollably. He made a split-second decision. Forget the coupling. Forget the immediate shutdown. He had to get to Elara now to prevent the injection. He would use Fenix's override chip to get through Sector 7's door and then destroy the coupling from the inside if necessary. He sprinted back up the stairs towards Sector 7, the pain in his arm forgotten. He reached the door and jammed the chip into the external access port. The lights flashed green, then stubbornly red. Access denied. A cold, smooth voice echoed from the internal speaker. Did you really think I would rely on a simple lock, Kaelen? Lord Valerius. The door slid open, revealing not Elara's chamber, but a brightly lit control room. Standing amidst a maze of glowing consoles was Lord Valerius, a man whose presence was a chilling anticlimax, meticulously groomed, wearing simple but expensive robes, and looking utterly calm. He was not a monster. He was an intellectual sociopath, but the most devastating sight was not Valerius. It was the girl standing beside him. She was beautiful, hauntingly so, with Kaelen's own silver eyes, but they were empty, devoid of the familiar light. She was dressed in white, pristine robes, secured to a central power pedestal by delicate, glowing manacles that pulsed with the void energy. "Elara!" Kaelen choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. She turned her head slowly, her face perfectly serene. She looked at him without recognition. And then Valerius smiled, a victory carved in ice. "She does not remember the child Kaelen, the brother of the past," Valerius purred. "She only remembers the truth. She is the anchor, the key to the new Erthos. And she chose her destiny. 20 years ago, she did not run from me. She ran to me." Valerius stepped aside, revealing a small crystalline vial in Elara's hand, the serum. "The lie I fed your parents served its purpose, Kaelen. Elara willingly sacrificed her attachment to you, to the world, for power. The power to save, you see, but only through me. She is about to inject the final stabilizer, the final act of her free will, to become the Aethelgard matrix. She sacrificed you, brother, for a greater purpose." The false truth struck Kaelen like a lightning bolt. His decades of pain, his oath, his hunt, all based on the belief that his sister was a prisoner, when in reality, she had chosen the shadow. The tragedy of the loss was suddenly compounded by the searing pain of betrayal. He stared at Elara, whose face held the distant, serene expression of a zealot. His heart, the shard of purpose, shattered in his chest. Kaelen felt the world tilt on its axis. The psychic hum, the alarms, the pain in his arm, it all faded into a meaningless background drone. All that mattered was Elara's vacant gaze and Valerius's chilling statement. "She ran to me." "No," Kaelen rasped, taking a slow, agonizing step forward. "That's a lie. You took her. I felt the cut." "The Aethelgard broke," Valerius chuckled, a dry, academic sound. "The Aethelgard did break, Kaelen, but only because Elara deliberately severed her side of the link to hide herself, a desperate measure to ensure her new path. She understood the true nature of power. The pain you felt was the necessary price of freedom, her freedom from the bonds of sentimentality." Elara lifted the crystalline vial, her hand steady. It glittered with a dark, oily liquid. Kaelen had only seconds left. He had to break through the conditioning, the lies, the 20 years of manipulation. He had to appeal to the ghost of the little girl who built forts with him in the woods. "Elara!" he roared, dropping his knife, holding his hands out in a gesture of absolute surrender. "Forget him. Forget the power. Remember the oak tree? The lightning strike? We were 10, and you were hiding, and I felt your fear from a mile away. You called me Star Eye. Remember Star Eye?" A minute flicker, a brief spasm of pain crossed Elara's serene face. It was gone instantly, suppressed by an inhuman discipline. "Kaelen," she said, her voice hollow, melodic, and profoundly distant. It was the voice of a beautiful machine. "The oak tree is dead. Sentiment is weakness. The new order requires stability. Valerius offers a path to peace, a control that eliminates suffering." Valerius beamed, a proud mentor. "You see, she truly understands. It was never a prison, Kaelen. It was a pilgrimage." Kaelen's heart was bleeding, but his mind, the mind of the pragmatic ghost, snapped back into focus. He looked past Elara's eyes, past the pristine robes, to the manacles on her wrists. They weren't just energy conductors. They were dampeners. If she had willingly chosen this, why the restraints? Why the forced stabilization serum? The real prison wasn't the room or the manacles. It was the psychological conditioning, the lie woven so deeply into her psyche that she genuinely believed her self-sacrifice was a choice. Valerius hadn't broken the Aethelgard link. He had inverted it, twisting her purest intentions into his most potent weapon. The pain Kaelen had felt 20 years ago was her fear of her own destiny, before Valerius had surgically removed her emotional memory. Kaelen took a deep, shuddering breath, locking away the betrayal, focusing on the sliver of resistance he had witnessed in her brief facial spasm. "You're not choosing Elara," Kaelen said, his voice low and guttural. "You're being used. You told me once that choice meant consequence. What is the consequence of that serum? Is it that you finally become free, or that you stop being you?" Valerius stepped forward, his patience dissolving. "Enough of this sentimentality. The activation is imminent. Elara, proceed." Kaelen lunged, not for Valerius, but for the console behind him, a desperate final attempt to shut down the system. Valerius, faster than Kaelen expected, moved to intercept, a flash of purple void magic erupting from his outstretched hand. The blast hit Kaelen in the chest, not with searing heat, but with crippling cold. He crashed into the far wall, his breath knocked out of him, his muscles locking in paralyzing agony. "The power of the void is not a toy. Ghost," Valerius sneered, walking over to Kaelen's paralyzed form. "Your sister's power, when finally unleashed, will make me a god. And you, Kaelen, will be the first one to witness it." Elara raised the vial higher, her thumb positioned over the injector. In that instant of utter despair, something snapped inside Kaelen. Not his spirit, but the suppressed half of the Aethelgard. It was a raw, unfiltered shriek of pure, agonizing loss. A mental blast aimed not at Elara's mind, but at the break between them, the psychic scar tissue that Valerius had formed. He didn't try to communicate. He simply flooded the broken link with a memory. The single moment, years ago, when Elara, 10 years old, had used her half of the Aethelgard to shield Kaelen from a falling branch. A silent, selfless act of love that had nearly cost her consciousness. The memory was pure, untainted, and powerful. Elara's hand, suspended over the injection point, trembled violently. Her serene mask cracked, revealing a terrified, lost little girl. Her eyes, Kaelen's eyes, flooded with tears, the first tears in 20 years. "Star Eye," she whispered, her voice regaining the warmth of a long-forgotten melody. Valerius screamed in rage, realizing Kaelen had found the Achilles heel in his conditioning, the memory she could not sever. He lunged at Elara to take the serum, but Elara was faster. Her eyes, now blazing with clarity and devastating realization, met Kaelen's one last time. It was a look of pure, agonizing apology and love. She wasn't injecting herself. She was making a final, tragic choice. She didn't inject the serum. She slammed the vial against the pedestal, shattering the crystalline container. The volatile contents, the consciousness suppressant and neural amplifier, splashed directly onto the glowing manacles and the power pedestal. The chemical reaction was immediate and catastrophic. The shattering of the vial released a shockwave of energy, an explosive burst of light that was both intensely hot and chillingly cold. The volatile serum, reacting with the void energy pulsing through the manacles, didn't just overload the system. It created a temporal feedback loop that ripped through Valerius's carefully constructed psychic matrix. Valerius screamed, clutching his head. The raw, unfiltered Aethelgard energy, suddenly amplified and destabilized, was tearing at his own mind. He had planned to control the power, but Elara's final, conscious act had turned his weapon against him. The paralysis left Kaelen as quickly as it had struck, replaced by a surge of overwhelming psychic pain. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the throbbing agony in his arm, and moved instinctively towards Elara, who was now weeping, the tears streaming down her face, the only sign of the living, breathing twin he had spent his life searching for. "Elara, we have to get out! We can still shut it down," Kaelen shouted, trying to reach her. She shook her head, a silent, desperate negation. The glowing manacles were burning into her skin, and the purple void energy was now swirling around her like a storm, fighting a losing battle against a torrent of pure, silver light emanating from her own body, The true, untainted Aethelgard resonance. "It's too late, Star-Eye," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the facility's screeching alarms. "The structure, the whole matrix is failing. Valerius tied my consciousness to the system core 20 years ago. The moment he severed our external link, he began weaving a permanent anchor." She revealed her real secret, the reason she had to break the vial, the truth Valerius never understood. "I didn't run to him, Kaelen," Elara confessed, her voice thick with emotion but fiercely clear. "I ran to a better defense. I'm not the battery. I am the failsafe." 20 years ago, when the 10-year-old Elara realized what Valerius intended, not just to use her, but to use the Aethelgard itself to enslave the continent, she made a pact with herself, an esoteric, psychic vow no one could detect. She allowed Valerius to think he was conditioning her, feeding him false compliance, while she secretly wove a deeper, hidden purpose into the very core of his Anima project. "The Matrix is designed to be self-sustaining," she explained, a frantic urgency in her voice. "If the power is cut, it auto-restores. The only way to permanently destroy the Anima project is to overload the system with pure, unstable Aethelgard energy. Valerius's serum was meant to stabilize the power and keep me compliant. By shattering it on the core conductors, I introduced the instability. I've broken the seal." The silver light surrounding Elara intensified, pushing back the purple void. The entire control room began to shake violently. Kaelen realized the full horror of her confession. The failsafe meant she had to be the detonation point. "No, Elara, there has to be another way. We find Fenix, we find Lyra, we evacuate the power source, anything. There is no time," she cried. "The destabilization is spreading to the main coupling in Sector 5. In minutes, the entire mountain will come down, but the psychic matrix itself, the real weapon, will try to escape and find a new host. I have to contain it. I have to keep it tethered to me until it collapses entirely." She looked at him, her eyes shining with the devastating raw love of their childhood. 20 years of hunting, Star-Eye. I always knew you would find me. I just needed you to break through the lie so that I could make this final choice. Knowing you'd be here to witness it, to remember the truth. Valerius, recovering from the initial psychic shock, saw his entire life's work dissolving. He let out a shriek of pure, impotent fury and rushed towards Elara, intending to kill her, to claim the residual power before it dissipated. Kaelen moved instantly, instinctively. His obsidian blade, which had fallen to the floor, was back in his hand in a flash. He positioned himself between Elara and Valerius. "You don't touch her," Kaelen growled, his voice a low, vibrating threat. He had lived for 20 years on the hope of reunion. He would spend his last moments ensuring her sacrifice was complete, not interrupted. The ensuing confrontation was not a measured duel, but a desperate, animalistic clash fueled by the collapse of reality. Kaelen, operating on pure instinct and the last drops of his reservoir of power, fought a losing battle against Valerius, who, though weakened, still wielded the raw, uncontrolled fury of the void. The high climax had begun. The control room became a vortex of conflicting energies. Kaelen and Valerius moved within a rapidly destabilizing field of psychic light and dark magic, while Elara stood at the core, her silver light burning brighter, anchoring the catastrophic collapse. Valerius's attacks were wild, uncontrolled bursts of purple fire and freezing shadow, meant to paralyze and incinerate. Kaelen, using his speed and his mastery of close-quarters combat, parried and dodged, his obsidian blade deflecting energy bolts that splintered the console behind him. He wasn't trying to defeat Valerius. He was running down the clock, defending Elara's fragile moment of clarity. "You ruin everything, Ghost," Valerius shrieked, his face contorted in maniacal rage. "The peace! The order! She could have ruled by my side." "You cling to sentiment, to weakness." "It's not weakness, Valerius," Kaelen countered, using the momentum of a block to spin and slash, tearing a gash across Valerius's pristine robe. "It's the only thing you could never control." Elara's voice cut through the clamor, weaker now, laced with profound exhaustion. "Kaelen, the structure... It's breaking! You need to go, now!" Kaelen knew she was right. Cracks were spiderwebbing across the control room's floor and ceiling, and the deafening groan of the mountain straining under the psychic instability was terrifying. But he couldn't leave her. Not now when they were finally reunited. "I promised you, Elara." "I'm not leaving you again," he roared, deflecting another dark blast with the flat of his blade. Valerius saw the opening. He unleashed a concentrated wave of pure void energy, a silent black torrent aimed directly at Kaelen's heart. Kaelen knew he couldn't block it. It was too powerful, too focused. Just as the blast was inches from Kaelen's chest, Elara acted. With a final desperate surge of will, she focused her own silver light, creating a temporary, protective dome of pure Aethelgard energy around Kaelen. The void energy collided with the Aethelgard, and the result was an explosion of sound and light that ripped the remainder of the control room apart. The protective dome saved Kaelen's life, but the strain was too much for Elara. She slumped against the pedestal, the silver light around her body beginning to fade. Valerius, disoriented but surviving the blast, staggered back, staring at Elara with a mixture of hatred and awe. "You protected him. Even now, then die alone." He raised his hand for a final, lethal strike, aiming for the core pedestal, intending to kill Elara and claim the residual power. Kaelen, seeing his twin fade, was infused with a sudden, devastating clarity. His half of the Aethelgard, which had been broken for 20 years, suddenly found its counterpart. In this final moment of life and death, the link snapped back together, not as communication, but as a perfect, unified conduit. The power of the Aethelgard, fueled by Kaelen's 20 years of grief and Elara's ultimate sacrifice, channeled through him. He didn't use a spell or a taught technique. He simply willed it. Kaelen unleashed his own raw energy, a silver lightning bolt, pure and untainted, aimed straight at Valerius. It wasn't the cold, calculated strike of the ghost. It was the ferocious, primal defense of a brother. The silver light struck Valerius, not burning him, but dissolving him. The void, unable to sustain itself against the Aethelgard's purity, retreated, leaving behind only dust and the scent of ozone. Lord Valerius, the architect of 20 years of misery, was gone. Kaelen collapsed, the monumental release of energy leaving him physically and psychically exhausted. The control room was a ruin, the alarms now sputtering and dying. He crawled towards Elara, his twin, his other half, who was leaning against the shattered pedestal, her body no longer glowing, but covered in devastating burns from the manacles. He reached her and pulled her gently into his arms. Holding her for the first time in 20 years, she was cold, so cold, but her eyes, her beautiful, silver eyes, were clear. "Star Eye," she whispered, a tremulous, genuine smile gracing her lips. "You came home." "I did, Elara. We're together now." "We're going home," he promised, tears finally falling, blurring the ruined landscape around them. "No," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face. Her hand was frail, translucent. "I am home. I kept the weapon tethered to me. The energy is dissipating, but it's pulling me with it. It's the price, Kaelen. The price for peace." The tragedy of the reunion was absolute. He had found her, only to lose her forever. The silence in the collapsing mountain was 1,000 times louder than the alarms. The mountain was giving way. The structure of Valerius's facility groaned and shifted, the deep fractures running through the rock signaling imminent collapse. Kaelen held Elara tighter, the warmth of his body desperately trying to stave off the fatal chill radiating from her. He knew with a devastating, final certainty that came through their reactivated, though fading, Aethelgard link, that her sacrifice was irreversible. Her consciousness was bound to the unraveling Anima matrix. To save the continent, she had to let herself be consumed by the implosion. "Don't talk like that," Kaelen pleaded, his voice breaking. He had faced death countless times, but this pain, the sight of his twin slipping away, was crippling. "There must be an antidote. Fenix, he knows the formula. I'll go back for him." Elara shook her head gently, a deep peace settling in her eyes despite the agony. Fenix can't save what is already spent. I use the Aethelgard as the cage, Kaelen. The purest light to hold the deepest dark. The darkness is gone, but the light must fade too, to ensure the seal holds. She reached out, her fingers tracing the scar on his forearm, a small faded mark from a childhood accident they had shared. Remember how our parents used to talk about the Aethelgard? Not just as a link, but as balance. The universe required a debt. I am paying it. 20 years of darkness for the continent's freedom. I chose this, Kaelen. Truly chose it in the end. Don't let my sacrifice be wasted on grief. Kaelen couldn't speak. He could only weep, the tears falling onto her ruined white robe. This was the moment that would define the rest of his existence. Not the rage of the hunt, but the acceptance of her selflessness. I won't forget the truth, he managed to say. I will tell them. I will tell them you saved them all. A faint, ghostly smile touched Elara's lips. Just tell them I loved the oak tree and the smell of the sea. Suddenly, the control room ceiling fractured violently, sending a shower of debris down around them. A single heavy piece of structural support separated Kaelen from the exit. He knew he had minutes, maybe less. Elara's voice was barely a whisper now, carried purely through the Aethelgard link. A final, silent conversation only they could hear. Go, Star-Eye. I feel Lyra and the others coming. Find Lyra, tell her. The mountain is hers again. And live, brother. Live a life for both of us. The pure, overwhelming force of her love and final command, her will, pushed Kaelen back from the pedestal. He felt an invisible, powerful barrier erupt around her, forcing him towards the shattered exit. It was her final act of protection, sealing herself into the collapsing core. No! Elara! Kaelen screamed, scrambling against the force field, his hands pressing against the invisible wall. Inside the barrier, Elara closed her eyes. The final flicker of silver light enveloped her, and the light, instead of exploding, began to contract, pulling the surrounding purple energy inward, condensing it into a pinprick of pure, contained darkness at the core of the pedestal. The moment the light vanished, the entire mountain gave a shuddering terminal roar. The power of the psychic implosion was sealed. Elara was gone. Kaelen collapsed, the barrier dissipating, leaving behind only silence and the smell of sulfur and wet stone. He had lost her, truly lost her this time, but he knew the continent was safe. A shadow fell over him. Lyra, the mountain hunter, stood at the entrance, her face streaked with soot and dust, her bow slung uselessly over her shoulder. She looked down at the ruined pedestal and Kaelen's broken form. She didn't need to ask. The Anima project is contained, Lyra stated, her voice heavy with respect. We breached the gate. Valerius's forces are routed. But the mountain is falling. We need to move. Kaelen didn't move. He just stared at the empty space where his twin had been. Lyra, understanding the magnitude of the loss, didn't press. She helped him up gently, the strength of the mountain woman lifting his broken spirit. We carry her memory out, Ghost. That is the only thing we can do for the fallen. Kaelen forced himself to stand, the silence in his heart now a permanent, echoing cavity. But it was no longer a silence of rage or absence. It was the silence of sacred remembrance. He took one last look at the ruined chamber, memorizing the place of his reunion and his final devastating farewell. The escape from the collapsing facility was a desperate scramble against gravity and falling rock. Lyra, navigating the treacherous, unstable corridors with practiced ease, guided Kaelen towards a secondary, hidden exit, an old mining shaft they had missed on their way in. Kaelen moved on autopilot. His physical injuries, the strained arm, the psychic shock, the cuts and bruises, were secondary to the gaping terminal wound in his soul. He followed Lyra, his feet moving automatically, the weight of the past 20 years replaced by the unbearable weight of the last hour. Lyra spoke only when necessary, her voice a steady anchor in the chaos. Fenix made it out, Kaelen. He opened the main gate as soon as the first explosion hit. He is with the others, heading towards the lower cave systems. We are going to meet them. The mention of Fenix stirred a flicker of Kaelen's original purpose. The scientist who had aided the enemy, however reluctantly, was a key witness to Elara's ultimate conscious sacrifice. His testimony was crucial to ensuring the truth was told, and Elara was remembered as a hero, not a victim. They finally emerged from the facility's complex and into the blizzard. The snow had intensified, mercifully hiding the full scale of the mountain's collapse. Below the ridge, Lyra's small team, a handful of mountain wardens and Lyra's loyal, silent scout, Bren, waited, along with a shivering Dr. Fenix. Fenix rushed forward, his face pale with guilt and shock. Kaelen, I saw the psychic signature collapse. The failsafe worked? She saved us all, didn't she? Kaelen met his gaze, his silver eyes cold and penetrating. She did, Doctor. She saved you. She saved the entire continent. Now you will tell the world the truth. You will write a detailed, verifiable account of Valerius's plan, the Anima project, and Elara's sacrifice. You owe her that. Fenix nodded, tears running through the grime on his cheeks. I will. Every detail. My life is dedicated to that now. Lyra gathered her small group. The passes will be closed for weeks. We are heading to the southern sanctuary. It's the only place with enough supplies and safety to cross the plains when the weather clears. The descent was an ordeal. They traveled for 2 days, battling the treacherous weather and the lingering psychic dissonance that radiated from the ruined mountain. Kaelen was a shell of the ghost of Etheria. He performed his duties, securing their perimeter, scouting their path. But his silence was absolute. Lyra and the others gave him space, recognizing the sacred nature of his grief. During a brief rest in a shallow cave, Lyra sat next to him. The facility is buried deep under a kilometer of rock now, she observed quietly. The psychic dampening field surrounding the Anima project imploded with Elara. It's stable. Valerius's taint is sealed away forever. She chose to become the tomb, Kaelen muttered, staring at the cave floor. She chose life for Erthos, Lyra corrected gently. She chose her brother's life. Valerius was right about one thing. The Aethelgard is a power based on balance. She used her immense love for you, her family, and the world to tip that balance back towards life. Her strength wasn't in her willingness to die, but in her willingness to sacrifice her 20 years of fear to achieve clarity at the end. That is the highest form of courage, Kaelen. Her words resonated with the final silent message Elara had sent him, a message of enduring love and ultimate purpose. He realized that his purpose had changed. The hunt was over, the enemy defeated, the promise fulfilled. Now his purpose was to honor her memory, not with revenge, but with life. As they continued their descent, Kaelen looked at Fenix, scribbling, furiously in a waterproof journal, recording the horrifying details. He looked at Lyra, the protector of the wilds, who had risked everything for a complete stranger. The world wasn't a world of shadows, betrayal, and broken promises. It was a world of sacrifice, courage, and hidden resilience. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, tattered blue scarf, the single devastating clue from 20 years ago. He had carried it through every dark alley and every high mountain pass. He held it now, the smell of salt and cedar still faint in the fibers. The journey was not over. Now, the journey of healing had to begin. They reached the southern sanctuary. A week later, a hidden settlement nestled in a vast, fertile valley that offered a brief reprieve from the high-altitude misery. It was a place untouched by Valerius's corruption, a community of healers, artists, and scholars who maintained the old ways. The news of the explosion in the Vale Mountains had spread quickly, but the truth was veiled in rumors. A powerful seismic event, an ancient curse. Kaelen and his companions were the only witnesses to the true events. Fenix immediately began synthesizing his account, working with the sanctuary's scribes to create copies and seals, preparing the documentation to be sent north to the Council of Eldoria. He provided the necessary scientific details, the complex structure of the Anima matrix, the consciousness suppressant, and the precise mechanism of Elara's failsafe. His testimony was clinical, verifiable, and damning to Valerius's reputation. Kaelen, meanwhile, faced the harder task, telling the story of the heart. He sat with the elder of the sanctuary, a gentle, wise woman named Meridia, and recounted his 20-year hunt. He spoke of the guilt, the rage, the crushing betrayal of the false truth, and finally, the overwhelming sacrificial love of Elara. "The council will want proof, Kaelen," Meridia said softly once his story was finished. "Proof that Valerius was annihilated, proof that the girl was a hero, not a fanatic. Fenix's data confirms the mechanism, but your words must carry the emotion. You are the sole witness to her courage." Kaelen understood the burden. His entire life had been defined by Elara's absence. Now, his life would be defined by her memory. He realized that the greatest danger still lay ahead, the political fight. To ensure her name was cleared, and that the new order Valerius sought to create would be stamped out completely. Valerius's influence, the Shadow Council, still permeated the courts of Viridian. They would try to spin the narrative, claiming Valerius was a martyr and Elara was a terrorist who destroyed a potential peace weapon. Lyra had decided to remain, in the south, fulfilling her role as the Mountain Warden, but she pledged her allegiance to Kaelen's cause, providing him with a written, detailed account of their infiltration and the atrocities Valerius's guards had committed in the mountains. Before parting, Lyra gave Kaelen a small, unpolished stone she had taken from the highest peak of the Vale Mountains. "It was the stone that held the first light of the sun on the day we breached the perimeter," she explained. "Keep it. It is cold, but it holds the memory of the highest sacrifice. Carry it in the north, Kaelen. Let it remind you of the clean air of the mountain." Kaelen accepted the stone, a heavy, cold weight in his hand, a tangible reminder of the tomb Elara now inhabited. His journey north was undertaken with Fenix and a small, trusted contingent of the sanctuary's guards, tasked with protecting the documentation. Kaelen was no longer the lone ghost. He was a guardian of truth. The return to Viridian, the city of whispers and false smiles, was an exercise in controlled fury. Kaelen, clean-shaven and dressed in simple, unadorned leather, walked back into the glittering courts not as a hired assassin, but as a man with nothing left to lose, armed with irrefutable truth. He presented the documentation to the Council of Eldoria, a weary, skeptical body of old men and women who preferred quiet stability over devastating reality. Fenix's technical report was irrefutable. Lyra's testimony was compelling. But Kaelen's was the emotional core. He stood before the council and spoke, not of fighting techniques or void magic, but of the Aethelgard, the beautiful, spiritual link between two souls. He described the little girl who loved cedar and the sea, the twin who smiled with her eyes. He described the horror of the false truth, the moment he thought she had betrayed him, and the devastating, glorious instant of clarity when she shattered the vial. "Lord Valerius told me my sister chose her destiny," Kaelen told them, his voice steady but layered with profound emotion. "He was right. She chose to save all of you. She chose to sacrifice her life, her soul, and her reunion with the only person who ever truly loved her to ensure the psychic matrix was permanently destroyed. Her name is Elara of Etheria. She was not a prisoner. She was the failsafe. And she is the reason you sit here, still free." His words hit the council with the force of a physical blow. The story, delivered with such raw, undeniable truth, was too powerful to ignore. The council was moved, but more importantly, they were motivated by the fear of the residual Shadow Council. The political battle, however, was only just beginning. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of political upheaval. Kaelen's testimony and Fenix's documentation provided the necessary evidence to dismantle Valerius's remaining network. The Shadow Council, exposed and vulnerable, was systematically rounded up by the Council of Eldoria's newly energized enforcers. It was a cleansing fire that swept through Viridian's corrupt elite, bringing down politicians, merchants, and even a few members of the military high command who had been compromised by Valerius's promises of power and control. Kaelen remained in Viridian, not for recognition, but to ensure Elara's legacy was handled with the sacred respect it deserved. He worked tirelessly with the few honest members of the council, including the weary but resolute Elder Meridia, to oversee the official declaration. Elara's story became a symbol. She was posthumously honored not just as a hero, but as the guardian of the Aethelgard, the one who ensured the spiritual purity of Erthos. Her story of 20 years of silent resistance, culminating in the ultimate self-sacrifice, became a rallying cry for a generation disillusioned by the corruption of the past. The emotional toll on Kaelen, however, was immense. The high-climax adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a cold, desolate landscape. He was a hero, hailed in the streets, but he felt utterly hollow. His entire adult life had been driven by the single purpose of finding her. Now that purpose was gone, replaced by an empty space that even the collective gratitude of a continent could not fill. One evening, he returned to the small, sterile apartment the council had given him. He placed Lyra's mountain stone on the table next to the faded blue scarf. He had fulfilled his oath, but he had lost the one person he lived for. He sat there for hours, the silence in the room echoing the permanent silence in his soul. A quiet knock interrupted his vigil. It was Elder Meridia. She entered, her face etched with wisdom and kindness. "The people are calling for monuments, Kaelen," she said softly, "but I think your sister would prefer something quieter, something that reminds us of the life she saved, not the way she died." She handed Kaelen a small sealed scroll. "The council has approved the creation of the Aethelgard Archives, a place dedicated to the study and preservation of the truth, the history of Valerius, the scientific data of Fenix, and the personal accounts of courage. Your personal memoir, the story of your hunt and your reunion, will be the central pillar. No lie can ever take root there." Kaelen took the scroll, his hands trembling. "Thank you. That is what she would have wanted. The truth. But there is more," Meridia continued, looking directly at him. "The other half of the Aethelgard still resides in you, Kaelen. It is broken, yes, but it is pure. You are the last living bearer of that lineage, the last living witness to its full power. You cannot carry the sword forever. You must choose a new purpose." "I don't know how to live without the hunt, Meridia," Kaelen admitted, the vulnerability stark in his voice. "I only know how to seek, to fight, to protect, and I failed the one person I had to protect." "You did not fail," Meridia stated firmly. "You gave her the power to choose. That is the highest success. Now you must choose to heal. The world needs a guardian of the truth, Kaelen. Not a killer of shadows, but a builder of light." She laid a hand on his shoulder. "Go back to Etheria. Rebuild the cottage. Plant an oak tree. When you are ready, the Aethelgard Archives will need a caretaker. A man who knows the difference between a prison and a pilgrimage. We need you to teach the next generation what true sacrifice means." Kaelen knew she was right. He couldn't stay in the political pressure cooker of Viridian. He needed to return to the silence, to the salt-laced wind, to the place where their story began, to mourn and to find peace. He thanked Meridia and spent the next few days saying his goodbyes. He secured Fenix a position as the chief scientific consultant for the archives. He sent a final sealed letter to Lyra in the mountains, promising to one day visit the freed territory. He packed a single bag, the blue scarf, Lyra's stone, his father's old journal, and his obsidian blade, now a tool of remembrance, not retribution. He was leaving the ghost of Etheria behind. He was simply Kaelen now. He was ready to go home and begin the long, slow, tear-jerking process of living a life for two. 5 years later, the village of Etheria was vibrant again. The scent of cedar and salt-laced wind filled the air, but the feeling of foreboding, the silent fear that had gripped the community for decades, was gone. Kaelen stood on the gentle slope overlooking the sea, a place where their childhood cottage once stood. The cottage was rebuilt, stone by stone, looking exactly as it had before the void magic blast, but warmer, filled with light. Next to the cottage, a young, resilient oak sapling was thriving, its leaves a deep, rich green. Kaelen had planted it the day he returned, a memorial to the past and a promise to the future. He was no longer the haunted ghost. His silver eyes, while still holding a profound sadness, also held a deep, quiet resolve. The permanent silence in his half of the Aethelgard had become a source of strength. It was the sacred memory of Elara, a constant, loving presence that no longer caused pain, but provided grounding. Kaelen was now the unofficial keeper of the Etheria coastline, a simple life of fishing, carpentry, and tending the small garden he maintained. He was also a consultant to the Aethelgard archives, traveling to Viridian once a season to speak to scholars and children, telling Elara's story with the quiet dignity it deserved. He had learned to laugh again, a low, genuine sound that surprised him every time. He had learned to love the simple beauty of a sunset without immediately thinking of the dark shadow of Valerius. He had learned that profound loss does not erase profound love. It merely changes its shape. On this particular evening, Kaelen was sitting by the newly planted oak tree, polishing the unpolished mountain stone Lyra had given him. He heard the sound of small, quick footsteps approaching. A child ran towards him, a 5-year-old girl with bright, curious eyes and hair the color of sea foam. Her name was Lyra, the daughter of the local baker and his wife, a couple Kaelen had befriended. "Uncle Kaelen, tell me the story again," she demanded, climbing onto his lap. Kaelen smiled, the lines around his eyes softening. He knew which story she meant. The story of the Star Eye? He asked. "No, the story of the twin who saved the world," Lyra corrected, shaking her head emphatically. Kaelen looked out at the sea, where the light of the setting sun made the water shimmer like liquid silver. He began the story, but not the version he gave the council. He told the children's version. Once, long ago, there was a little girl named Elara, and she had eyes like the moon, he started, his voice a low, comforting rumble. She loved 2 things more than anything else, the big oak tree by the sea, and her twin brother, Kaelen, whom she called Star Eye. And she had a big, secret power, not the kind that makes things explode, but the kind that makes choices. The darkest shadow in the world tried to take that power and use it to control all the lights in the sky. But Elara knew a better way. She knew that the strongest light is the one that is given away, not the one that is stolen. He paused, touching the blue scarf tied to the lowest branch of the young oak tree. So, Elara gave her light away, he finished. She broke the darkness with the light of her love, and that light traveled everywhere, saving the world and making sure that every child, like you, could always run free by the sea. Lyra looked up at the oak tree, then back at Kaelen, her face serious. "And she is gone now?" "Yes," Kaelen confirmed softly. "But she is here too. She is in the strength of this tree, and she is in the wind that smells of salt, and she is in the memory of every person who is kind and brave. She left a debt for us to pay, to live well, to love fiercely, and to never let a shadow steal our light again." Lyra hugged him tightly. "I will be brave like Elara." "I know you will," Kaelen whispered, holding her close, feeling the weight of the mountain stone in his pocket and the warmth of the child in his arms. He had lost his twin, his other half, his reason for rage. But Elara had ensured he found a new purpose, the guardianship of memory, the quiet, tear-jerking beauty of life, and the promise of a future secured by sacrifice. His journey of 20 years was over, replaced by a life of perpetual, hopeful remembrance. He finally looked at the shimmering sea and for the first time felt completely, profoundly at peace.